Awesome work on setting up all our static components, meaning the components that just take the data, whether that is user data, whether that is repos or followers, and display it. So now, of course, this would be an awesome time to make our app dynamic, where we'll also include a search form. So then the user can type the user he or she wants to search for. For example, we could search for Brad Traversy. And then, of course, the moment we submit the form, now we hit the GitHub API, we get all the awesome data that is going to come back. And once it does, then we display information about our user, the one that we search for. And also, of course, we display how many requests we can still make. So let's do that. Let's start working on this search form. And of course, we would first need to find our component. And also in the dashboard, remember, we commented out the search. So now this would be a awesome time to uncomment search. So now we should have that heading 2, the one from the very beginning of our project. And now in search.js, let's start working on this component. And in this component, there's going to be a local state. So as we're typing in the form, there's going to be a state that collects that. And then from the global one, we'll get a function that hits the API. So I decided to split this up because I think it makes a little bit more sense instead of jamming everything globally. That's why we'll start with this component by setting up a user, and we'll use use state. So we're going to go with user, then set user function, and that is going to be equal. Let me correctly add that set user, and that is equal to React use state, and we'll start with an empty value. So essentially just a empty string. Then we're going to get some things from global, not for now. So get things from global context. That is going to happen eventually. And also, once I submit the form, since I know that I'm going to have the form, I'm going to have a function that handles that. So for the time being, I'm just going to go with const handle submit. And then, of course, I would want to have a event object. So I'm just going to say here E. And then for the time being, we're just going to console log stuff. So we're going to say log, and let's see. We're going to take a look at the user. Okay. All right. So that is our handle submit. Of course, there's going to be a little bit more functionality in the handle submit, but for the time being, that should do it. So now let's set up our return. Instead of heading 2, I'm going to go with a section. We'll add a class name here. So class name is equal to a section. Then in the section, we're going to go with a wrapper, like so, the one that we currently have here, wrapper. And then let's add a class name here as well. Class name, section center. And then within this wrapper, let's start by setting up the form. So we're going to go with form. And then instead of action, I would want to handle it on our end, of course. So that's why I'll right away say that once we submit the form, we'll invoke the handle submit. So I'm going to go with on submit, and that is going to be equal to my handle submit. All right, awesome. And then inside the form, what I would want to set it up, well, I would want to probably have a form control. So form control, and then inside of that form control, I imported a icon, and also I'm going to place the input and a button. So let's do that. I'm going to go with my icon, and the icon name is MD search. Let's close the icon, then input. That is just going to be simple text, but let's add a placeholder there as well. So placeholder, and that is going to be equal to enter GitHub user. All right, beautiful. And let's save that just so we can see what we have. All right, so we have our form, and also it would be awesome if we would have a button that allows us to submit the form. So let's go with button. It's going to have a type of submit, and then we're just going to type here search. Let's do that. And also I would want to set up my requests, because notice on the right hand side here, I have my requests. So each and every time I'll set up a request, and the moment we load the application, we'll check how many requests the person who is visiting the site still has. So we'll do that right outside the form, but still inside the wrapper. We're going to go with heading 3, and we're going to say requests. And eventually, it's going to be coming from our global state, but not for now. So let's just hard code some kind of value, 60 out of 60. Let's save it. All right, so we have our requests. And now let's do two things. First, I would want to update the value in the state, the user value, as I'm typing. So the moment I start typing, I would want to update this value. And the second thing is I would want to prevent the default once I submit the form. Because at the moment I'm not doing that, so notice how we are reloading the application each and every time we submit the form. And I guess I'm going to start by updating the user. So I have my user and set user. So first, for the input, I could add a value here. And I could say that value is going to be equal to a user. So whatever, I already have typed it out. And the second thing, of course, we need to have our on change. So as we're typing out, we're listening for this event. And then we need to decide, well, what are we doing? And then in this case, I'm going to have my arrow function. I'm going to pass my event. And I'm just going to say set user. So I'm invoking my set user function. And I'll just pass here event, target, and then value. Since I have access to the event object, on the event object, I have property by the name of target, and then I can just look for the value. So whatever I'm going to be typing. And then, of course, in order to prevent the default, as far as the forms, we just go with E and then prevent default. And then once we invoke this method, of course, in a console, we should see whatever value we have for the user. Again, don't worry. There's going to be more logic here. So I'll type more logic coming up soon. Let's do this one. Let's save it. And I think I'm going to navigate to a bigger screen just so I can see it better. Let's do inspect. We have our console. Awesome. We have the warnings. We don't care about those. Let's just type something out there. And once I submit the form, I just need to scroll down. And there it is, whatever I typed it out. And I guess we'll start by setting up our logic where I would want to check whether I have entered something. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to say if user is true. Now, what that means that if the user is going to be empty string, then I'm just not going to do anything. That's all. I'm not going to display. I'm not going to say you cannot submit the form with empty user. I mean, of course, if you want, you can do that because later I will show you how we can have some kind of errors. For example, if we're searching for the user that doesn't exist, if I try to do this in the application, you'll notice that there is going to be an error. There is no user with that username. So definitely, if you want, you can also set up a flag where, for example, if you're trying to submit the empty form. Or in my case, I just decided that if that is the case, if the person who's visiting your app and searching for the user by trying to submit the form with an empty value, I'm just not going to do anything. I'm going to say, yeah, if the user is true, then I would want to do that more logic. If not, well, nothing is going to happen. So you can click all day long, but if there's no value in there, well, nothing is going to happen. And the second thing, again, there's going to be more logic, but the second thing is optional. So I'm going to type here optional because you also can do set user and get it back to an empty string. So if we test it out, I'm going to navigate back to a star. And if you type the moment you'll submit the form, and of course, there's going to be some kind of value, you could go back to a empty form. However, in my case, again, in the complete app, that's not what I went with. So for example, if you're searching for some kind of user or here, and then if you get that user, I'm still leaving that name because I think it just makes more sense. Because for example, what if you messed it up and now you need to retype the whole name just because you messed up with one letter? That is my preference. That's why I'm saying that this is optional. This is up to you. If you want, of course, each and every time you submit the form, you can set it back to an empty. But in my case, I won't do that. So that should be our basic setup for the search form. And of course, now we can just head back to our context and then set up the logic where we can make this dynamic. So we'll start communicating with the GitHub API.